They wiped out a human outpost. Earth's retaliation shattered a fleet. They thought humanity would break. They thought an outpost was all it would take to silence us. But when the Terran fleet arrived, the galaxy learned a truth carved in fire. No one strikes at humanity and lives to tell the tale. The Harvest Moon Incident. The agricultural colony of Harvest Moon orbited a yellow dwarf star in the Sagittarius arm, 300 light-years from Earth. For 32 years, it had been humanity's breadbasket among the stars, feeding 17 other colonies with its genetically modified crops that could grow in alien soil. The morning shifts were beginning when disaster struck. Director Thomas Mitchell stood in the observation dome of the main agricultural station, watching the sunrise paint the fields below in shades of gold and amber. The colony had grown to 1.7 million souls, mostly farmers, botanists, and their families. Children ran through the wheat fields that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Scientists worked in laboratories developing new strains of crops. It was peaceful, productive, and completely defenseless. The first warning came from a junior technician named Sarah Park. She was monitoring deep space communications when her screen lit up with proximity alerts. 12 massive vessels had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They moved with purpose, maintaining perfect formation as they approached Harvest Moon. Thomas received the alert in his office. The ships were unlike anything in their databases. Each vessel measured over 5 kilometers in length, covered in what appeared to be crystalline armor that reflected light in impossible patterns. They made no attempt at communication despite repeated hails from the colony. The colony's defense consisted of 2 patrol boats and a handful of automated satellites designed to deflect asteroids. They were farmers, not soldiers. Their weapons were meant for clearing debris, not fighting wars. When the alien ships opened fire, the patrol boats lasted less than 30 seconds. The satellites were vaporized instantly. The bombardment began at 0800 local time. Energy weapons of unknown design carved through the atmosphere, turning the air itself into plasma. The first strikes hit the population centers. Cities that had taken decades to build disappeared in seconds. The screams of millions were silenced in flashes of light that could be seen from orbit. Dr. Lisa Chen was in the seed vault when the attack began. Built deep underground, it contained genetic samples of Earth's flora and humanity's greatest agricultural achievements. She felt the ground shake as bombs fell above. The lights flickered, then died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red. She knew they had minutes at most. With trembling hands, she activated the quantum transmitter. It was meant for sending research data to Earth, but now it would carry their final message. She uploaded everything the colony's sensors had recorded, every image of the attacking ships, every energy signature. Her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face as she recorded the final transmission. The attackers called themselves the Zarathi Collective. They claimed this sector of space belonged to them, that humanity's presence was contamination that needed to be cleansed. They gave no warning, accepted no surrender, showed no mercy. The colony fell in 4 hours. The seed vault ceiling began to collapse. Lisa pressed send on the transmission just as the roof caved in. The last thing she thought about was her daughter Emma, who had been at school when the attack began. At least the message would get through. Earth would know what happened. Earth would remember. Above the dying world, the Zarathi ships completed their work with methodical precision. They deployed specialized weapons that would ensure nothing could ever grow on Harvest Moon again. The soil was poisoned at the molecular level. The atmosphere was stripped away. What had been a garden world became a barren rock, a monument to xenocide. Commander Vexhar of the Zarathi watched from his flagship with satisfaction. These humans were soft creatures who spread across the galaxy like weeds. They built farms instead of fortresses, sent scientists instead of soldiers. They were prey pretending to be predators. The galaxy would be better without them. The Zarathi fleet departed as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving behind only death and silence. They had other human colonies to visit, other gardens to burn. In their arrogance, they believed humanity would cower, would retreat to their homeworld and trouble the galaxy no more. They had no idea what they had awakened. The message from Harvest Moon reached Earth 23 days later. It arrived at the Deep Space Communication Array in Antarctica during a routine data synchronization. The technician on duty, Marcus Webb, almost dismissed it as corrupted data. Then he saw the priority markers and emergency protocols. He opened the file and watched hell unfold on his screen. The images showed children running from plasma fire, families vaporized in their homes, entire cities reduced to glass and ash. He heard Dr. Chen's final words, her voice breaking as she described the death of everything she loved. By the time the transmission ended, Marcus was sobbing. The news spread through Earth's government within hours. President Elena Volkov called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. For the first time in 70 years, every leader on Earth agreed without debate. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would respond. In secure facilities beneath mountains and oceans, doors that hadn't opened in generations began to unlock. Computer systems that had been dormant since the last Great War hummed to life. The weapons humanity had hidden away, the terrible tools they had sworn never to use again, were brought into the light. Earth had been peaceful for so long that the galaxy had forgotten why. They had forgotten that humans had once turned their own world into a battlefield, had created weapons that could crack continents and poison worlds. They had forgotten that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't learning how to make war, but learning how to stop. Now they would remember. The Zerathi had murdered 1.7 million innocent people. They had destroyed a world that fed millions more. They had made a fatal error in judgment. They had reminded humanity what they were capable of when pushed too far. In shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, construction began on vessels the galaxy had never seen. On Mars, factories that had been museums started producing weapons that violated 3 different galactic treaties. On Earth itself, volunteers lined up by the millions. Everyone had seen the footage from Harvest Moon. Everyone wanted justice. The peaceful farmers and scientists of humanity were setting aside their plows and microscopes. They were remembering skills their grandparents had taught them, skills they had hoped never to need. They were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. They were becoming humanity at war, the awakening of old Earth. The Global Defense Council convened in the deepest bunker beneath Geneva, a facility that hadn't seen use since the water wars of 2089. President Elena Volkov stood before a holographic display showing Harvest Moon's last moments. Around the table sat the leaders of Earth's United Nations, their faces grim with shared purpose. Admiral Rebecca Stone entered the chamber, her uniform bearing dust from storage. She was 73 years old, officially retired for a decade, but she was the last living commander who had seen actual combat. Her gray hair was pulled back severely and her eyes held the weight of old battles. She had been tending her garden in Scotland when the call came. Now she stood before humanity's leadership, ready to wage war again. The president spoke first, her voice carrying the grief of millions. Admiral Stone, we are activating Protocol 7. All military restrictions are lifted. Every weapon in our arsenal is at your disposal. The only objective is justice for Harvest Moon. Rebecca studied the faces around her. These were politicians, diplomats, people who had spent their lives avoiding conflict. Now they were asking her to unleash hell. She had one question that needed answering first. The Geneva Conventions still apply? She asked. The treaty obligations regarding civilian targets and proportional response? President Volkov's expression hardened. The Zerathi showed no mercy to our civilians. They poisoned the soil so nothing will ever grow again. They killed children, Admiral. The conventions apply to those who honor them. The Zerathi have placed themselves outside civilized law. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then we need to discuss what nobody wants to talk about. Project Nemesis. The room fell silent. Project Nemesis was a ghost story, a rumor of weapons so terrible they had been sealed away rather than destroyed. Most people believed it was propaganda, a deterrent that never actually existed. But Rebecca knew better. She had helped design some of those weapons in her younger years before wisdom had taught her their true horror. Dr. James Harrison, Earth Science Director, activated a secured display. The specifications appeared in the air and several council members gasped. Nemesis consisted of 12 different weapon systems, each capable of unprecedented destruction, singularity bombs that could create temporary black holes, nanoplague swarms that could disassemble matter at the molecular level, stellar disruptors that could age a star by millions of years in seconds. These weapons were sealed for a reason. Harrison said quietly. We built them when we were afraid, when we thought the galaxy might turn against us. We sealed them when we realized we had become the monsters we feared. Rebecca walked to the display, studying each weapon carefully. The Zerathi have 12 colony worlds and a home system. They command a fleet of approximately 300 warships. Their technology is advanced, but not beyond our understanding. With conventional weapons, we could fight them for years, maybe decades. Millions would die on both sides. She turned to face the council. With Nemesis, we could end this in 6 months. The question you need to answer is not whether we can win, but what victory means to you. Do you want to defeat the Zarathi, or do you want to erase them? The debate lasted 12 hours. Some argued for restraint, for targeting only military assets. Others, those who had lost family on Harvest Moon, demanded total annihilation. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but everyone could accept. Admiral Stone would lead humanity's response with full authority. She would have access to Nemesis weapons, but would use them only if conventional warfare failed. The primary goal was to force Zarathi surrender and ensure they could never threaten humanity again. If that required their complete destruction, so be it. Rebecca left the council chamber and went directly to the Mars naval yards. What she saw there took her breath away. In the 70 years since humanity had turned to peace, they hadn't stopped innovating. They had simply changed what they built. The same technology that created perfect agricultural domes had been repurposed to create perfect warship hulls. The engines that moved cargo efficiently between worlds had been modified to give unprecedented speed to battleships. The fleet taking shape was unlike anything in galactic history. 200 vessels, each one a masterpiece of human engineering. The dreadnoughts were 3 kilometers long, armed with weapons that channeled the power of stars. The carriers held fighter craft that could think and react faster than any biological pilot. The stealth ships could bend light around themselves, becoming invisible to every known sensor. But it was the flagship that truly showed humanity's capabilities. The ESV Retribution was 5 kilometers of controlled violence. Its hull was made from compressed matter so dense that conventional weapons would simply bounce off. Its main gun could accelerate projectiles to 0.95 the speed of light. Its computers could coordinate the entire fleet as a single organism. Rebecca walked through the ship, meeting her crew. These weren't the hardened warriors of old Earth. They were teachers, engineers, doctors, artists, all volunteers who had answered the call. They trained 18 hours a day, learning to become what humanity needed. They studied war with the same intensity their parents had studied peace. Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen approached her on the bridge. He was young, barely 30, but his eyes held determination that reminded Rebecca of herself decades ago. His sister had been on Harvest Moon, along with her 3 children. He had personal reasons for being here, but Rebecca had chosen him for his tactical brilliance, not his loss. "Admiral, the fleet will be ready in 4 weeks," he reported. "The crews are adapting faster than expected. The neural integration with ship systems is at 92% efficiency." Rebecca nodded. The neural integration was another innovation, allowing human minds to merge temporarily with their ship's computers. It gave them reaction times measured in nanoseconds and tactical awareness spanning light years. It also meant that when a ship died, its crew felt every moment of its destruction. It was a price they were willing to pay. The volunteers kept coming. By the 3rd week, they had more people than ships to hold them. Humanity was united in a way it hadn't been for generations. Old rivalries were forgotten. Political differences became irrelevant. Every factory on Earth retooled for war production. Every scientist worked on military applications. Every citizen contributed something. Messages of support came from humanity's other colonies. They couldn't send ships, most didn't have any, but they sent resources, information, and prayers. They also sent a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity stood as one. An attack on any human was an attack on all humans. The Zarathi, meanwhile, had noticed the unusual activity around Earth but dismissed it as panic. Their intelligence suggested humans were evacuating their homeworld, fleeing in fear. They prepared to take Earth as their next conquest, already dividing up its resources among their warrior castes. They had no idea that the ships massing around Earth weren't running away. They were preparing to bring war to the Zarathi in ways their xenophobic minds couldn't imagine. Humanity wasn't fleeing. Humanity was coming for them. The Zarathi Empire's arrogance. The Zarathi Collective operated from a crystalline city that floated in the upper atmosphere of their home world, Zerath Prime. The city, called the Eternal Throne, had never been breached in 4,000 years of their spacefaring history. Within its transparent walls, the High Council convened to discuss the human situation. High Commander Vexhar stood before his peers, his forearms crossed in a gesture of casual dismissal. The humans continue their futile activity around their birth world. Our scouts report ship construction, but their vessels are primitive compared to ours. They build with metal and ceramics while we grow our ships from living crystal. Elder Zix Theta, ancient even by Zarathi standards, examined the intelligence reports through compound eyes that had seen the rise and fall of dozens of species. These humans eliminated themselves from consideration when they chose agriculture over conquest. Every successful species in the galaxy understands that power comes from taking, not growing. The Zarathi had built their empire on a simple philosophy: the strong consume the weak. They had encountered 43 other spacefaring species in their expansion. 20 had been absorbed into their collective as slave races. 23 had been exterminated for resisting. None had ever successfully fought back. Their technology was based on crystalline matrices that could store and channel enormous energies. Their ships were grown rather than built, each one a semi-living organism that could repair itself and adapt to threats. Their weapons dissolved matter at the quantum level, leaving nothing behind but scattered atoms. They considered themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. Sub-Commander Kreval, younger and more cautious than his superiors, raised a concern. The humans successfully colonized 17 worlds in less than a century. Their expansion rate exceeds any species we've encountered. Perhaps we should consider them more carefully. Vexhar's mandibles clicked in amusement. They spread because they were unopposed, not because they were strong. Look at what they built on those worlds. Farms, research stations, cultural centers. Not a single military base. They are gardeners playing at being a galactic power. The High Council agreed unanimously to proceed with the second phase of their plan. 3 battle groups would be dispatched to eliminate Earth's 3 nearest colonies. After that, Earth itself would fall. The entire human species would be extinct within 1 rotation of Zarath Prime around its star. What the Zarathi didn't know was that humanity had been watching them for weeks. Stealth probes, no larger than grains of sand but equipped with quantum sensors, had infiltrated their space. Every word spoken in the Eternal Throne was transmitted back to Admiral Stone. Every ship movement was tracked. Every weakness was catalogued. Rebecca stood in Retribution's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing Zarathi positions. Her commanders were linked in from their respective ships, their faces grim as they reviewed the enemy's deployment. "They're sending 3 battle groups out simultaneously," she announced. 40 ships each, targeting New Sydney, Constantine, and Harmony colonies. They expect to catch us evacuating. Instead, they're walking into a trap. The human fleet had departed Earth 2 weeks ago, but not as one massive armada. They had split into hunter-killer groups, each one positioned along the routes the Zarathi would have to take. The aliens' crystalline technology had one weakness humanity had discovered. It was vulnerable to certain frequencies of directed energy. Weapons that would bounce off conventional armor could shatter their crystal matrices like glass. Captain Maria Rodriguez commanded the strike group, waiting for the Zarathi heading to New Sydney. Her ship, the ESV Thunder, was a modified carrier equipped with experimental frequency weapons. She had been a physics professor before Harvest Moon. Now she was about to put theory into deadly practice. The Zarathi fleet dropped out of hyperspace exactly where predicted. Their formation was perfect. Their shields raised, their weapons charging. They expected to find fleeing civilian vessels or at most a token defense force. They found neither. Maria's group materialized around them like ghosts becoming solid. The stealth systems dropped, revealing 30 human ships in perfect ambush position. Before the Zarathi could react, the frequency weapons fired. Beams of precisely tuned energy struck the crystal ships, setting up resonance patterns that tore them apart from within. The lead Zarathi vessel, a massive dreadnought that had destroyed dozens of worlds, shattered like a wine glass struck by a soprano's high note. Its crew of 3,000 died instantly as their ship became a cloud of crystalline dust. The other ships tried to adapt, modulating their shields, but the humans had prepared for that. Fighter craft, piloted by AI systems that could think at light speed, swarmed the Zarathi formation. They carried penetrator missiles designed to punch through crystal armor and deliver their payload directly into the ship's cores. Each missile contained a nanoscale disassembler that consumed crystalline matter and converted it into more disassemblers. Within minutes, Zarathi ships were eating themselves from the inside out. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, 40 Zarathi vessels were gone. Not disabled, not damaged, but completely destroyed. The humans had taken no casualties. Maria's only injury was a minor headache from the neural link stress. Similar scenes played out at Constantine and Harmony. The Zarathi battle groups were annihilated with surgical precision. For the first time in their history, the Zarathi had lost not just ships but entire fleets. The survivors who escaped in life pods carried back reports that the High Council refused to believe. Impossible, Vexhar shouted when the first reports arrived. No species has ever destroyed our crystal ships. The humans are primitives. They don't have the technology, but the evidence was undeniable. The debris fields where their fleets had been. The sensor logs showing weapons unlike anything in their databases. The terrified testimonies of survivors who spoke of human ships that appeared from nowhere and fired, beams that made their vessels scream as they died. Elder. Zixatheta was the first to understand the magnitude of their error. We judge them by what they chose to build, not by what they were capable of building. They didn't build weapons because they didn't need them. Until now, the Zarathi Empire mobilized its entire fleet. 300 ships, the combined might of their civilization, gathered at Zerath Prime. They would not wait for the humans to come to them. They would take the fight to Earth and end this threat before it grew stronger. But Admiral Stone had anticipated this too. The destruction of the battle groups had been a message, a demonstration. Now came the real war. The human fleet was already moving, not toward Zerath Prime, but toward the Zarathi's conquered worlds. They would free the slave species, destroy the infrastructure of oppression, and show the galaxy that the Zarathi were not invincible. The hunter had become the hunted, and the Zarathi were about to learn what humans had known for generations. The most dangerous predator wasn't the one with the sharpest teeth or strongest armor. It was the one smart enough to turn the enemy's strength into weakness, the one patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Humanity had been patient for 70 years. Now patience was over. The symphony of destruction, the Zarathi's main fleet, 300 crystalline vessels arranged in their traditional battlesphere formation, moved through hyperspace toward Earth. They carried weapons that had shattered moons, warriors who had never known defeat, and the absolute certainty of their superiority. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Stone had positioned the human fleet at the Cardos Junction, a region of space where multiple hyperspace routes converged. It was the only path the Zarathi could take to reach Earth quickly. She stood on the bridge of the Retribution, neural link fully engaged, feeling the ship's sensors as her own senses. Around her, 200 human vessels waited in carefully calculated positions. Lieutenant Commander Chen monitored the quantum sensors. "They're coming, Admiral. 300 ships just as predicted. They'll exit hyperspace in 40 seconds. Rebecca felt the calm that came before battle, the moment when all preparation ended and action began. All ships, she broadcast through the neural network. Remember Harvest Moon. Remember the children who died. Today we teach the galaxy that humanity protects its own. The Zarathi fleet exploded into normal space with the confidence of conquerors. Their sensors immediately detected the human fleet, but instead of concern, High Commander Vexhar felt satisfaction. The humans had gathered their entire force in one location. He could destroy them all at once. All vessels, Vexhar commanded. Standard envelopment pattern. Crush them from all sides. The Zarathi battlesphere began to expand, moving to surround the human fleet. It was a tactic that had worked in 100 battles. But as they moved into position, something unexpected happened. Space itself seemed to ripple around them. Admiral Stone smiled grimly. Activate the gravity wells. Humanity had done something the Zarathi thought impossible. They had weaponized gravity itself. Devices hidden in the fabric of space activated, creating artificial gravity wells that grabbed the Zarathi ships and pulled them off course. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly found themselves dragged in different directions. Their careful battle plan shattered in seconds. The human fleet struck while the Zarathi were still trying to understand what was happening. The dreadnoughts fired their main guns. Projectiles accelerated to near light speed that punched through crystal armor like paper. The carriers released swarms of fighters that moved in patterns calculated by quantum computers, always striking where the enemy was weakest. But it was the special weapons that truly showed humanity's creativity and destruction. Ships equipped with temporal distorters created pockets where time moved differently, aging Zarathi vessels by centuries and seconds, watching them crumble to dust. Others deployed quantum viruses that infected the Zarathi's living ships, turning their own biology against them. Vexhar watched his fleet dying around him and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. His own flagship, the Eternal Supremacy, shuddered under impacts that bypassed their shields entirely. The humans were using weapons that violated the known laws of physics. Impossible, he muttered, watching another dreadnought dissolve into constituent atoms. They're primitives. They're farmers. His tactical officer, bleeding from where crystal shrapnel had struck him, spoke the truth Vexhar couldn't accept. They're humans, Commander. And we murdered their children. The battle became a slaughter, but not the one the Zarathi had planned. Human ships danced between enemy fire with impossible grace, their neural-linked pilots reacting faster than thought. When Zarathi weapons did hit, adaptive armor that learned from each impact absorbed the damage. Ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting, their self-repair systems healing wounds in real time. Captain Rodriguez led her fighter wing in an attack run on a Zarathi carrier. The massive ship launched its own fighters, crystalline shards that could slice through conventional armor. But Maria's fighters weren't conventional. They phased in and out of normal space, becoming ghosts that weapons couldn't touch, solidifying only long enough to deliver devastating strikes. She felt her fighter's AI merge with her consciousness, becoming a single entity of purpose. Together they carved through the Zarathi formation, leaving destruction in their wake. Each kill was for someone who had died on Harvest Moon. Each destroyed ship was a message to the galaxy. Humanity would not be victims. Elder Zix Theta, commanding the reserve fleet, watched the battle from what he had thought was a safe distance. His compound eyes processed the destruction with growing horror. In 3 hours they had lost 200 ships, 2/3 of their entire fleet gone. The humans had lost 12 vessels, and most of those crews had been recovered by rescue ships. "High Commander," he transmitted to Vexhar. "We must retreat. We cannot win this battle." Vexhar's response was a scream of rage. "The Zarathi do not retreat. We do not surrender. We are the apex predators of the galaxy." His words were cut off as the Retribution's main gun found his flagship. The projectile, a compressed antimatter warhead wrapped in a shell of exotic matter, punched through the Eternal Supremacy's hull and detonated in its core. The explosion was visible from 3 light-years away, a brief new star that marked the death of Zarathi pride. With their commander dead and their fleet dying around them, the remaining Zarathi ships began to flee. They scattered in all directions, abandoning formation, abandoning honor, abandoning everything except the desperate need to survive. But Admiral Stone had prepared for this too. Interdiction fields activated, creating barriers in hyperspace that trapped the fleeing ships in normal space. They had nowhere to run. The human fleet closed in, weapons charging for the final blow. 100 Zarathi ships remained, carrying 30,000 crew members, all waiting for death. Then Admiral Stone did something that shocked both fleets. She ordered her ships to hold fire. Surviving vessels of the Zarathi fleet, her voice echoed across all frequencies. "You came to our space. You destroyed our colony. You murdered our people. By all rights, we should destroy you as you destroyed Harvest Moon, but we are not you. We are human, and humanity can choose mercy." She paused, letting her words sink in through the universal translators. "You will surrender unconditionally. Your weapons will be destroyed. Your empire will be dismantled. Every species you have enslaved will be freed. You will return to your home world and never again venture into space. These are not negotiable terms. You have 1 minute to decide." Elder Zix Theta, now the senior surviving officer, looked at the readings on his screens. The human weapons were locked onto every remaining ship. They could all be dead in seconds. But they were being offered life, something the Zarathi had never offered their enemies. It took him only 10 seconds to decide. "We accept your terms, Admiral Stone." The Zarathi collective surrenders. The remaining Zarathi ships powered down their weapons and lowered their shields. For the first time in 4,000 years, the Zarathi had been defeated. More than that, they had been shown mercy by a species they had considered weak. As the human fleet escorted their prisoners back toward Zarathi space, messages began spreading across the galaxy. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken the Zarathi Empire in a single battle, but more importantly, They had chosen not to commit genocide in return. The galaxy would remember this day, but not just for the victory. They would remember it as the day humanity showed that strength didn't require cruelty, that justice didn't demand vengeance, and that sometimes the greatest power was the power to forgive, the price of peace. 6 months after the Battle of Kartos Junction, Admiral Rebecca Stone stood in the ruins of what had once been the Zerathi Eternal Throne. The crystalline city still floated in the atmosphere of Zerath Prime, but it was no longer a symbol of oppression. It had become a monument to change. The dismantling of the Zerathi Empire had been surprisingly smooth. When the slave species learned of their master's defeat, rebellions erupted on every conquered world. The Zerathi, without their fleet and faced with uprisings everywhere, had no choice but to accept the new reality. Their empire of 4,000 years crumbled in weeks. Rebecca walked through the council chamber where Vexar had once planned the destruction of humanity. Now it hosted a different kind of gathering. Representatives from 23 species sat at a circular table, discussing the future of the sector. Humans sat alongside Therixians, Valori, and even Zerathi, all working towards something that had never existed before. A true galactic community. Elder Zixatheta approached her, his crystalline form much dimmer than it had been during the war. The defeat had aged him, but it had also changed him in deeper ways. He had spent months studying human history, trying to understand the species that had spared his people when they had every right to destroy them. "Admiral Stone," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into English. "I have read about your wars on Earth, the violence you inflicted upon yourselves. How did you stop? How did you choose peace when you had the power to conquer?" Rebecca considered her answer carefully. This question had been asked by many species since the war ended. "We learned that victory without wisdom is just delayed defeat. Every conqueror eventually faces someone stronger. Every empire built on violence falls to violence. We nearly destroyed ourselves before we understood that strength should be used to protect, not to dominate." She gestured to the gathering around them. "Look at what we're building here. Trade agreements instead of conquest. Cultural exchange instead of forced assimilation. Your species had the power to do this 4,000 years ago. You chose fear instead." Zixtheta's optical organs dimmed, and what she had learned was the Zerathi equivalent of sadness. "We believed that showing mercy was showing weakness. We never understood that it takes more strength to spare an enemy than to destroy them. Your species taught us that lesson, though the price was terrible. The price had indeed been terrible." Harvest Moon remained a dead world, its soil poisoned beyond recovery. The 1.7 million people who died there could never be brought back, but their sacrifice had changed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. The liberated slave species had expected humans to take the Zerathi's place as the dominant power. Instead, humanity had proposed something radical. A galactic alliance where every species had equal voice, equal rights, and equal protection. The strong would defend the weak. The advanced would share knowledge with the developing. Conflicts would be resolved through diplomacy, with force used only as the absolute last resort. Lieutenant Commander Chen, now Captain Chen, commanded one of the new Alliance patrol fleets. His ships included human vessels, but also Therixian scouts, Valori science ships, and even a few reformed Zerathi, who had embraced the new way. He reported directly to Rebecca, who had been elected the first admiral of the combined fleet. "Admiral," Chen reported during a quantum communication, "we've encountered something interesting in the former Zerathi border territories. A new species, pre-FTL, but showing signs of developing hyperspace technology." Rebecca studied the data he transmitted. The beings were insectoid, reminiscent of Earth's mantises but standing 3 meters tall. Their world showed signs of recent atomic war, cities in ruins, but also massive construction projects suggesting they were rebuilding. "Follow first contact protocols," she ordered. "Observe but don't interfere unless they directly request help. And Chen, make sure they know they're not alone in the universe. Sometimes just knowing others survived their violent phase is enough to give a species hope." This had become humanity's new mission. Not conquest, not even exploration for its own sake, but guardianship. They had become the galaxy's protectors, the ones who ensured that no species would suffer what Harvest Moon had suffered. The memorial on Earth had been expanded. It still held the names of everyone who had died on Harvest Moon, but now it also held something else. The names of every Zarathi who had died in the battle, every slave who had perished under the Empire, every life lost to senseless violence. The inscription had been changed too. It now read, "They died in darkness so we could find the light." We remember them all. President Volkov visited the memorial often. The war had aged her, turned her hair completely white. But she had also overseen humanity's transformation from a scattered collection of colonies to the de facto leaders of a galactic alliance. She stood before the wall of names, reading them as she always did, when a young voice interrupted her thoughts. Why did we forgive them? A child no more than 10 stood beside her with the fearless curiosity of youth. My teacher says the Zarathi killed millions of people. Why didn't we kill them back? Elena knelt to meet the child's eyes. Because killing them wouldn't bring our people back. It would just create more orphans, more widows, more grieving parents. We had the power to break the cycle of vengeance. That's not weakness, that's the hardest kind of strength. The child considered this, then asked another question that cut to the heart of everything. But what if they do it again? Elena smiled sadly. Then we'll stop them again. But look around you. She gestured to the park surrounding the memorial, where humans and aliens of a dozen species walked together, their children playing without fear or prejudice. The Zarathi who survived are not the ones who attacked us. They're the ones learning to be better. If we had destroyed them all, they never would have had that chance. Back on Zerath Prime, the transformation continued. The Zarathi had been required to destroy all their weapons, but they had been allowed to keep their other technology. Under human guidance, they were converting their crystal-growing techniques from military to civilian use. Cities that had once built warships now created architectural wonders. Warriors who had once conquered worlds now protected trade routes from pirates. Not all Zarathi accepted the new way. Some, calling themselves the Pure Collective, had fled to the Galactic Rim, vowing to rebuild their empire. Admiral Stone monitored them carefully, ready to act if they became a threat. But their numbers were small, and without the resources of an empire, they were more annoyance than danger. The real challenge came from an unexpected source. Other galactic powers, ones that had watched the war from a distance, began testing humanity's resolve. They launched small raids, probed defenses, tried to determine if humans would respond to every provocation with the same overwhelming force. Rebecca handled these challenges with calculated responses. Pirates who attacked human merchants were captured and tried, not obliterated. Species that encroached on human territory were met with diplomatic envoys before warships. But when a consortium of 3 aggressive species jointly attacked a human research station, killing 50 scientists, the response was swift and decisive. The human fleet appeared in the 3 species' home systems simultaneously, a feat of coordination that had never been achieved before. They didn't attack. They simply demonstrated their presence, then broadcast a single message. We protect all human lives. You have killed 50. Choose carefully what happens next. The 3 species immediately sued for peace, agreeing to reparations and treaties. The message was clear to the entire galaxy. Humanity preferred peace but would enforce it with overwhelming strength when necessary. As the first year of the Galactic Alliance ended, Rebecca found herself back on Earth, standing before the Global Defense Council for what she hoped would be the last time in a military capacity. She was retiring, truly retiring this time, passing command to the next generation, who would hopefully never need to use the weapons she had wielded. President Volkov presented her with humanity's highest honor, the Peace Through Strength Medal, created specifically for those who had fought in the Zarathi War. As Rebecca accepted it, she thought about all those who couldn't be there to receive theirs, the crew members who had died in the few ships humanity had lost, the colonists of Harvest Moon, even the Zarathi who had died believing they were protecting their empire. In her retirement speech, Rebecca spoke words that would be remembered for generations. We discovered something in this war that our ancestors knew, but we had forgotten. The true measure of strength isn't in the enemies you destroy, but in the enemies you transform into friends. We could have erased the Zarathi. We had the power, the justification, and the anger, but we chose a harder path. We chose to break the cycle that had defined galactic relations for millennia. Today, former Zarathi warriors stand guard beside human soldiers, protecting trade routes that benefit all species. Zarathi scientists work with human researchers to terraform dead worlds into gardens. Their children play with our children, learning that difference doesn't mean enemy. This is Harvest Moon's true memorial. Not a dead world left as warning, but a living galaxy where such tragedies become impossible because we stand together. Every species watching, every civilization wondering if they should test humanity, remember this. We are gardeners by choice, warriors by necessity, but above all, we are teachers. And the lesson we teach is simple. The galaxy is large enough for all of us to thrive in peace. 5 years later, that peace held stronger than ever. The Galactic Alliance had grown to include 37 species. Wars still occurred on the fringes, but they were small, quickly contained, and resolved through mediation more often than violence. The galaxy had learned what humanity had learned long ago. Cooperation yielded better results than conquest. On the 10th anniversary of Harvest Moon's destruction, something unprecedented happened. The Zerathi, using new technology developed in partnership with human scientists, announced they had found a way to cleanse the poisoned soil. It would take generations, but Harvest Moon could live again. Elder Zix Theta, now the Zerathi representative to the Alliance, personally delivered the proposal to humanity's council. "We cannot bring back the dead," he said, his aged form trembling with emotion. "But we can restore what we destroyed. Let Harvest Moon bloom again, tended by all species together as a symbol that from the greatest tragedies can come the greatest unity." The project was approved unanimously. Ships from every Alliance species contributed resources. The Therixians provided atmospheric processors. The Valori supplied genetic samples from their vast biological archives. Humans brought the memories of what Harvest Moon had been and the hope of what it could become again. Captain Chen commanded the first ship to land on Harvest Moon's restored surface. Exactly 15 years after its destruction, he carried with him a sealed container of soil from Earth and seeds from every human colony. As he planted the first new tree in the rehabilitated soil, he spoke words broadcast across the galaxy. "This tree grows for the 1.7 million who died here. Its roots reach deep into soil once poisoned by hatred, now cleansed by cooperation. Its branches will reach toward stars no longer divided by violence but united in peace. May it stand for 1,000 years as proof that humanity's greatest victory was not defeating our enemies, but teaching them to become our friends." The tree was a hybrid, genetically modified to include DNA from plants native to Earth, Zerath Prime, and the 20 other Alliance worlds. It was hardy, adaptable, and beautiful in its diversity. Within a year, a forest of such trees surrounded it. Within 5 years, cities began to rise again, built by beings of all species working side by side. Harvest Moon became the Alliance capital, neutral ground where no single species held dominance. Its population grew to include millions from across the galaxy, all living proof that peace was not just possible but profitable, not just idealistic but practical. Admiral Rebecca Stone, now 93 years old, made one final journey to see the restored world. She walked through the new cities, watched children of a dozen species playing together, and visited the memorial at the center of the capital. It still bore the names of the original colonists, but now it also carried a new inscription. They died separated. We live united. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy. The knowledge that every ending can be a beginning, every enemy can become an ally, and every tragedy can teach us to be better than we were. From the ashes of Harvest Moon grows the garden of tomorrow. Rebecca touched the memorial stone, remembering the anger that had once driven her, the weapons she had wielded, the choice she had made to offer mercy when vengeance would have been easier. She had lived long enough to see that choice validated, to see former enemies become steadfast allies, to see the galaxy transformed from a battlefield into a community. As she stood there, a young Zerathi approached, barely out of childhood. In perfect English, the youth asked, "Admiral Stone? My grandmother told me about you. She said you spared us when you could have destroyed us. Why?" Rebecca smiled, the same sad but hopeful smile she had worn for 15 years. "Because, young one, the universe is too vast and beautiful to fill with graves. We can choose to be gardeners or destroyers. Humanity chose to plant seeds of peace. Your generation is the harvest we hoped for." The youth considered this, then offered Rebecca a gift, a crystal flower, grown using Zerathi techniques but shaped like an earth rose. "For the gardener who taught the galaxy to grow," the youth said. Rebecca accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. This was humanity's true victory. Not the battles won or the technology developed, but this. A universe where former enemies could create beauty together, where children grew up without learning to hate, where peace was not just the absence of war but the presence of hope. The story of Harvest Moon would be told for generations, each telling adding new chapters. How humanity responded to genocide not with extinction, but with education. How the Zarathi transformed from conquerors to contributors. How the galaxy learned that strength without wisdom was weakness, but wisdom with strength could reshape reality itself. And in the vast cosmos, on countless worlds, beings looked up at the stars no longer with fear of what might come to destroy them, but with wonder at what they might build together. This was humanity's legacy, not that they had won a war, but that they had won the peace that followed, creating a future where no child would ever again watch their world burn from orbit. The giants had fallen silent, not in death but in wisdom. The weapons were sheathed not in defeat but in victory, and in that silence, that peace, the galaxy finally heard what humanity had been trying to say all along. We are stronger together than we could ever be apart.